May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be for good pleasure before thy sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. Amen. Please be seated. We are reading through the Gospel of John as preparation for Easter and looking back, coming from Christmas and a new year. And while we can't read everything in the Gospel of John on every Sunday, because there's so much there, one of the things that we can start to do, especially if you read on your own, which I invite you to do, encourage you to read the Gospel of John on your own during the next month, is to see some of the most famous stories and passages from the New Testament, from the Olive Word, from all of history, in context with each other. That context really matters. It helps us understand what the Lord was trying to teach. Our reading today from John can be broken into two basic halves. The first half is a miracle story, and the second half is, at first blush, a somewhat confusing doctrinal explanation of who God is. Now, it's worth knowing that the way that the gospel was written was according to providence. So the way the gospel was written is according to providence. In other words, the Lord guided the writing of it. He didn't guide it magically by grabbing hold of the pen and forcing someone against their will to write what was written. He worked through the people who witnessed it and recorded it. And not just through them like a puppet master, through a puppet, but through them through their mind, through their spirit, through their thoughts, and through their heart, by means of them. That is not to say that they were written by, say, John, as the Gospel of John was written by, but by the Lord. Now, this is very important, but it's also an illustration of something that we're going to talk about further. So just keep that idea in mind, that the Gospel of John is written by this man named John, but really it was written by God. But it's important that it is also written by this person named John, who was a disciple, one of the younger disciples, beloved by Jesus. And the reason why Jesus seems to be called someone who loves John more than the rest isn't because John got somehow some special favor, but because John was able to receive more of Jesus' love because John loved Jesus more than others. That's an important little distinction. We can talk about it another time, but John's ability to be the one beloved by Christ was because he loved Jesus. And he's one of the youngest disciples. And the Gospel of John is written after the Gospel of Matthew, Mark, and Luke. And John read those Gospels. Those Gospels are stories that are told all around the Mediterranean and the Near East in that first 50 years after the Lord's crucifixion and resurrection. And everyone's wondering, who was Jesus? And Matthew establishes that Jesus is the King. Now, there's also hints and clear statements that he was also the Son of God, the Christ, the Savior, and even that he is the Father. What does that mean? Mark, similarly, establishes that Jesus was a great prophet, someone who did many miracles, more miracles than anyone ever had before. And that he was a great prophet, a great teacher, and again, the Christ. Luke does the same. But during that time, people wanted to know, how is it? How does it work that Jesus is both God and man? What does that mean? They were asking that question. And they were going to the disciples and to other people who had met Jesus and asking them, what does it mean that Jesus was God and man? Could you explain this? At the same time, the disciples were starting to pass away. Peter, Matthew, James, Andrew, Philip, these men were dying because they were either being crucified, like Peter, or otherwise martyred, or just dying of old age. And people were worried that John would die, and then what would it mean? And they had lots of reasons to be worried. One of them was that they all expected the second coming of Christ to happen before the last disciple died. There's a reason, because Jesus told them that. He said, some of you will not be dead before I come again. And he said that to his disciples, so they're all wondering, okay, which one of them? Oh no, John's the last one. Is he going to come again? Now, if you take that literally, you might be a little confused, wouldn't you? Think, well, it didn't happen when John was alive. Was the Lord tricking them? What does he mean? So they're asking John, please explain, please explain. And John, from his own heart and his own understanding and his own experience of being with Jesus, records what happened. Now all of it, is guided by the Lord. It is him doing the work. All of those fun details I told you about history and scholarship and things like that, what's really going on is the Lord is making sure that this gospel gets to you today. That's what all of that was, is the Lord getting this to you today, and getting it to anyone that reads it at any time throughout all of eternity. It's the Lord guiding a process. John consciously put these two stories together, because the way the gospel was read was people would read a chapter, and a chapter wasn't like a chapter in a book. It was literally a scroll. Remember, they didn't have bound books. So the Gospel of John would be many scrolls, and you might pick up the next scroll to get to the next chapter. So this is the 5th scroll in the Gospel of John. And you would read the whole thing, and it was one complete thought. And when they would have these feasts of charity where they'd all get together and they'd eat together, they would celebrate the Holy Supper, they would tell stories about their cousin who was healed, someone might recite the gospel, a chapter. And it was one complete thought. And John knew this when he wrote the Gospel of John, chapter 5. And the Lord knew it. So he wants you, John wants you, the Lord wants you, to see these two thoughts as one. So the first is that there is a man who is at the pool of Bethesda. Now, the pool of Bethesda is this almost mythological pool in Jerusalem at the time. It was real, and people believed that if you saw the waters moving, seemingly on their own, that it meant an angel had come down and stirred the waters, and whoever was first to bathe in them, you can imagine a rush, they would be healed of any disease. Now, this didn't happen every day, didn't happen regularly. It wasn't something you could set a clock to, if you had clocks, which you didn't. So, people would come to the pool, and if they could afford it, they would wait there as long as they could, hoping that the waters would stir, and then get in first. It was like a race. And you can imagine that many people would come to the pool because they were sick, sit there for a couple of days, maybe with their friends and relatives, and then have to go home because they can't afford to just sit at a pool. People can't do that. Here is a man who had been with an infirmity where it's hard for him to walk for 38 years. And for much of that time, he's been at the pool waiting. And he doesn't have friends who can help him. So he's just there, waiting. And when the water stirs, he's never the first one in. It sounds kind of pathetic. You can imagine maybe he's begging there. Or maybe he was wealthy at one point, could afford to stay, but he's spent all his money. He didn't have enough money to hire servants, otherwise they would have put him in first. So he's poor. And he's got a little bedroll. You can imagine it like a thick blanket that he's lying down on. It's very common to have these. And he's lying there waiting. Jesus comes to him and asks him what we would think is an insensitive question. Do you want to be healed? If you went to a hospital and you had a broken arm or you were bleeding a lot and the ER doctor said, "What's wrong? Do you want to be healed?" Well, of course. Here I am. And if Jesus is God, why does he need to ask? Which means that this question isn't Jesus needing to learn something. And he's not being rude. He's trying to get the man to think about his own life. What's more, Jesus, as we've talked about many times before, as the Lord, is not primarily concerned with this man's health. It's not why he's here. He's not here to heal people who are infirm and waiting at the pool of Bethesda. It's not why he came to the earth. He didn't come to heal blind people and cure the sick. He will do it because he's filled with compassion and because it helps him teach a lesson. But he's there for their souls. So when he sees the man at the pool of Bethesda, he is filled with compassion to save him. That's what he's worried about. That's what he's concerned with. That's what drives the Lord. That is his motivation in everything he does, is to save this person and to save us. And so he heals him. And he instructs him, take up your bed and walk. Go do this. Now, technically, very hyper-technically, that's totally okay. You are, on the Sabbath, allowed to carry your bed and walk. Just so you know. It is not breaking the Sabbath to carry your bed and walk, especially if it's all you have. Totally fine. Especially if you're a sojourner. If you're somebody without a house and you're walking from one place to another. You're allowed to do this. But, according to the Pharisees at the time, it was breaking their law. That counts as work, so you can't do that. So he's breaking the Pharisees' rules. He's not breaking the Sabbath. And the Pharisees come to him and say, "Why are you doing this?" And he has a brilliant answer. "The person who healed my sickness told me to." That's good and obedient. And it makes sense. If somebody has that kind of power and tells you to do something, you do it. He is being obedient to a healer. But he doesn't know who did it, and he doesn't know who that person is. He just knows that they have authority over the Pharisees. That he's the boss. That he's the boss, further, of the Sabbath. So whatever else, he thinks that this person who healed me is in charge of what's allowed on the Sabbath. What does it tell you about him? What's more, where does he go right afterwards? He picks up his bed, he rolls it up, he's been told to roll it up and walk, and then on his own, the very first place he goes is the temple. He is immediately going to worship Yahweh. That's his plan. That's good. Which means he must think whoever told me to do this, whoever healed me, is the boss of the Sabbath, so I better go to the temple and pray and worship and do what you do at the temple. There's no other reason to go. And Jesus finds him there. Now, it's not like we might find one another at the grocery store. He goes in, finds him. He goes to the temple to get him. Because he's not done. Jesus is not done with this man. There's something else that matters way more for the Lord. And it's what he says to him. And this phrase is incredibly important. And remember, everything in the chapter is in context. And the entire chapter swings on this sentence. The story transitions from a nice miracle story to a teaching story on this. Afterward, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you have been made well. Sin no more, lest a worse thing come to you." Something worse than being infirm for 38 years. That's bad. What would cause something worse than being infirm for 38 years? Sin. So what causes that condemnation? Sin. How does he avoid that condemnation? By not sinning. This is not a complex idea. If you don't want to be suffering from something worse than a 38-year infirmity, don't sin. That's how you avoid it. Do you want to not have a miserable marriage? Don't commit adultery. Do you want to get along with your friends? Don't backstab them. It's very simple. And notice those examples are from the Ten Commandments. The shorthand for the Ten Commandments in the Gospels and throughout the New Testament and in much of the time period, both in Jewish and Christian philosophy, is what Moses told us. That's the Ten Commandments and everything derived from it. So, how do you not have something horrible happen to you? Do what Moses said. Follow the Ten Commandments. Sin no more. That's how you figure out what sinning is. Then, the Jews want to kill Jesus. Because he told someone what to do on the Sabbath instead of them. He's taking their place. They don't like it. And you'd think a normal person might say, oh, my bad, I don't want to have a fight. Instead, Jesus doubles down and says, the Father gave me the authority to do this. Because he and I are equal. And that really sets the Pharisees off. Because now they think they've got him. Because now he's blaspheming, if he's lying. But he's not, so he's not blaspheming. But from the Pharisees' perspective, now they must destroy him. But he doesn't stop there. Then he explains, he explicates, he goes on and on about the Father and him. Now, I encourage you again, please, read this on your own. I'm going to give you some guideposts, methodology, a way to read it. First of all, remember what Jesus is here for. It's all in the first chapter, or in the first half of this chapter. He is here to save people's souls. And the way he's going to do that is going to tell them to sin no more. That's the key. Then he says, this teaching that I just gave this man is from the Father. But it's through me. He doesn't judge you, and I only judge you through what you've done. And listen to these last words. Do not think that I shall accuse you to the Father. I'm not going to say, hey, you're terrible. It's not me. There is one who accuses you, Moses, in whom you trust. For if you believed Moses, you would believe me, for he wrote about me. But if you do not believe his writings, how will you believe my words?" Jesus is saying that a prerequisite, a requirement for believing in Jesus is to believe the words of Moses. Now, belief gets thrown around all the time in English, and it's been mutilated for lots of political and religious reasons, religiously political or politically religious reasons, to mean all sorts of things. The Greek word here, belief, means trust. Trust that leads to action. If I say to my son, "Believe me, don't touch the stove, it's hot." If he believes me and then touches the stove, he didn't really believe me, did he? He didn't trust me. He didn't think I was right. He needed to find out for himself, and he got burned. Thankfully, he didn't. I'm happy about my son not getting burned. But I do say that to my kids all the time. I say, "Trust me. Put your gloves on. It's cold outside." And then they run outside, and they're like, "My hands are cold." Yes. You didn't believe me. I believed you. You kind of did, but you really didn't. Your ears might have thought, "Oh, this could be an accurate statement." But your body, your behavior, your heart did not believe. What does it mean to believe in Moses? To do what he said. What does it mean to believe in the Ten Commandments? It doesn't mean that you want plaques up throughout America with the Ten Commandments. Nothing wrong with that, but that's not what belief means. Believing the Ten Commandments means obeying them, living according to them. Believing Jesus doesn't mean, "I believe." It means doing what he says. And he says that over and over again in his own words. "But those who do the will of my Father." If you don't believe me, you don't believe him. And if you don't believe Moses, you don't believe me. So how do you believe Jesus? By following the Ten Commandments. What's more, we see this in Jesus' own actions when he talks to the man who was healed at the pool of Bethesda. "Go and sin no more, lest something worse happens to you." That's what it means to believe the Father. But read it on your own. And when you read it on your own, have this formula in mind. The Father is divine love. He is loving, merciful. He loves you. Just like we have love, each of us. Jesus is divine truth. He is what leads and guides. And we can see Jesus. We can't see the Father. Similarly, you can't see my love. You can't see my love. You can see the evidence of my love. And the evidence of my love is through my words and my deeds and my actions. So the way you see divine love is by seeing Jesus. That's how you see God, is by looking at Jesus. There he is, in the flesh. He and the Father are one. And yet, it's a distinct enough idea that he needs to talk about them differently. Because of what it means to receive divine love. Divine love is pouring out at you all the time. The Lord absolutely, completely, to the ends of eternity, loves you. He does. He loves everyone here. He loves everyone that's ever been created by him, who is, by the way, everyone in the world. And he always will love them. And he loves them infinitely, which is hard for us to imagine. But people can't equally receive that love because they reject it. If I give you a gift and you throw it in the trash, that doesn't change how much I love you, but it does change how much you can be loved by me. And the same is true with the Lord, with the Father, with divine love. He has given you a gift, his word, Christ, the truth. And inasmuch and to the degree that we receive that gift, then we are able to receive his love. It doesn't change how much he loves us. It only changes how much we can be loved. That's in our control. In fact, it's the only teeny tiny thing that is in our control. It is where the Lord gives us freedom, which is to receive or reject. He has given us the Ten Commandments. He has given us rules, ways of seeing the world and behaving, ways that we can love the neighbor. And to the degree that we receive that and do it, to that same degree do we receive his love and are able to love. That's why the Lord wants people to sin no more, because he loves them. That's what the Lord is trying to tell the people here. And what's more, it's not sometime in the future. He even says in this chapter that the time and the hour is right now when people will get up out of their graves and either be alive or go to hell. Obviously, he didn't mean it literally, because it didn't happen literally. But he does mean it. That right now, for you, to the degree that you love the Lord by obeying his commandments, to that degree you live. It's not an all or nothing thing, though. Remember, this is written by John, the one whom Jesus loved more than the other disciples. Is that because Peter is a terrible person? No. Just happens to be that John was able to receive the Lord's love more than the other disciples. It's an amazing thought. One of the things that I would like to know when I die and get to the other world is I would like to ask John, what exactly do you mean? How is you love him more? I want to know. I'm curious. But I take it on faith, trust, that John must have loved to follow the commandments more. Does that mean that Peter went to hell? No. Just meant that John loved him more. It's by degree. It's not all or nothing. What's more, for you, relax. It's not all or nothing. We all vacillate. Even John, who is called the one that the Lord loved, rejected the Lord, ran away from him during the crucifixion, and then came back. The same thing happens to us in life. It's not all or nothing. We will fail, we will break the commandments, we will do things that are wrong, and then we'll return. That's what learning is about. But have faith, real belief, that the Lord infinitely loves you and is always reaching out for you, always knocking, always there for you to return to him. And his path is his word. And you can see him in it. Amen. Please rise for an ascription to the Lord. Now to the one God of heaven and earth be glory and dominion forever and ever. Amen.